Good morning, everyone. Oh, come on, morning check. Good morning. Good morning. You didn't have to yell. I'm Eugene. I'm one of the pastors here, and it is good to be with you all. We have just started a new sermon series here called Trendsetters because we're such a cool, edgy church. I'm just kidding. And I want to begin today by telling you about one of the first trendsetters that I ever met. It was my freshman year in high school. It was a couple years ago, really. And I always sat behind the same girl in homeroom and in gym. It wasn't like that. We're just friends. Because her name was Delia Kim. And my name is Eugene Kim. Our names are in alphabetical order, and so we ended up next to each other a lot. And so naturally, we became friends. And for the most part, she was just a regular girl, yet I don't think I'd ever met anyone, even to this day, anyone who had so many friends. She was a tiny Korean girl. She stood less than 5 feet tall, but she stood out. She was kind and friendly to everyone, but the thing that made her really stand out was that she was never shy about her faith in Jesus. Even though I had grown up in church, she was the first Christian that I ever met who seemed to actually try to live what she believed. And it wasn't in an obnoxious way, right? People actually liked and admired her. And she stood out in many ways, but one of the ways that she really stood out from everyone else is that she made the choice, out of her personal conviction, to not listen to any of the music that everyone else was listening to, but only listen to Christian music. Talk about suffering for the gospel, right? So, in order to explain why this is so significant, I need to provide a little historical background for all of you younger folks. Nowadays, music is virtually free, right? I can listen to almost any song I want, whenever and wherever I want, but this was 1988. Before Spotify, before YouTube, before the internet, before iPods and MP3s, we all rode our dinosaurs. Back then, if you wanted to listen to a song, any song, you had two options. You had to physically go to a record store and buy not just the song, but the whole album. Even if you didn't like any of the other songs on the album, you couldn't just buy a song, okay? Option 2, wait by the radio until, and some of you are like, until your song came on, and hopefully the DJ would shut up and stop talking, and you hit the record button at just the right moment on one of these, okay? And this is amazing because this is the actual model of boombox that I had when I was growing up. So I saw that, and I almost started to cry. I was like, wow. It was like seeing an old friend. I could go on and on about all the ways, you kids are so spoiled these days. But my point is this: music wasn't this easily accessible luxury that we take for granted now. Anytime I want, I can go on my phone and I can listen to music I don't even like just because I can. But in the 80s, music was more than just expendable entertainment because it took so much work to get music. You had to choose. You had to really choose. The music you listened to was an expression of your identity. And it's not an exaggeration to say that it determined what social group you belonged to. Okay? It was a big deal. And so when my friend Delia made this decision to not listen to Depeche Mode and Erasure like every other Asian in New York City in the 80s did. Anyone? Oh my gosh, okay, great. Some people might have found that odd, a little unusual, right? It was more than just an expression of her musical taste. It was a statement about her identity. It was a clear marker that she was not like everyone else. See, everyone knew she was a Christian. Probably most importantly, she knew she was a Christian. As a result, she was naturally aware of her speech and conduct, because she knew she wasn't just representing herself, she was representing Christ. It's not an exaggeration to say that this one girl made it a little less weird to be a Christian in our school, even made it kind of normal. She probably touched countless lives, including my own. My friend Delia was a trendsetter. In this series, we're asking what it means for us to be trendsetters, people who lead the way for the sake of others and for the sake of Christ. And we're looking at some words of advice the Apostle Paul gave to his protege, Timothy. And it reads, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young," includes some of you here, "but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." Today we're mixing up the order a little bit and focusing on two words that really go hand in hand: faith and conduct. What does it mean to set an example in our faith and conduct? And I hate to admit this, but when we decided that I would preach on faith and conduct, honestly, my heart sank a little bit. I guess I should preach another sermon about how we're supposed to get our acts together, about believe a little harder, behave a little better, okay? Just, everyone, let's just call this a day, okay? Stop sinning, be holy, be a good Christian example for others, okay? Everybody got it? Let me just close in prayer then, okay? See, many of us have heard dozens of sermons like this. I have preached sermons like this. And it's not that it's wrong to learn how to obey and follow Jesus. Jesus commissioned his disciples to obey everything he commanded, to teach them to obey everything he commanded. That's exactly what we ought to be doing. The problem is, it might not be working so well. In the passage that was just read for us, Jesus calls us the salt and light of the world. We're called to stand out and make a difference in the world. Unfortunately, Christians are too often known to stand out for all the wrong reasons. I've cited this Barna research study before, that when non-Christians were asked to describe Christians, the words most frequently used were helpful, sweet, and kind. No, I'm just kidding. Unfortunately, the words most frequently used were judgmental, hypocritical, close-minded, insensitive, too critical, and political. Jesus said, everyone will know us by our love. So it makes you wonder if maybe there's something the church is getting wrong, something that we are missing. We live in an increasingly post-Christian society. According to one study, over 1 million young people will walk away from their Christian faith every year. And that is not even counting the millions more who won't even have any opportunity whatsoever to meet Jesus in any meaningful way. And I know many of you are keenly aware that in your workplaces, your schools, and even among your friends, it is not popular to be a Christian these days. And as we talk about what it means to be a trendsetter, we need to be honest about the reality that is already happening all around us. Here's a news flash. Christianity is not trendy. In fact, it's fallen out of style. A Pew study last year found that Americans actually feel warmer towards almost every religious group except evangelicals. Now, I want to be clear that I do not see the church in America as this kind of victim in this situation. In many places around the world, there are Christians who are being persecuted for real. for the sake of Christ. America is not one of those places. If Christians are getting a bad rap these days, I mean, there are some ways that has happened that aren't fair or accurate for sure, but there are also a lot of ways that churches and Christians have veered so far off course from God's love and character that we totally deserve to be called out. We deserve it. So how do we wrestle with following Jesus in a culture that is increasingly hostile to faith? And Christians tend towards two extremes. We tend to be combative or complacent. Combative or complacent. Many Christians might try to follow Jesus by digging in their heels and fighting aggressively for what they believe is right. If the world is hostile to us, then we can be hostile right back. We're not going to lose, right? Being combative doesn't necessarily mean we're mean to people. It just means we have that oppositional energy, right? That competitive spirit. We want to win. We want to be right. We're the winning team. But these efforts, instead of being received as good news and love for others, are more often interpreted as insensitive, holier than thou, judgmental, and arrogant. And so, when Christian leaders get caught in moral failure, or when corruption and abuse in religious power structures are exposed, it just reinforces what many non-Christians already believe about Christianity, that it must be just a bunch of hypocritical nonsense. Many other Christians work really hard to not be associated with those kinds of Christians. And so we try to be just like everybody else. We become complacent and learn to fly under the radar. Just be nice. Try not to offend anyone. Blend in. Stealth mode. But if Christ doesn't make any difference in your life and doesn't make a difference in the lives of others around you, then why bother? There must be a better way. We need something better than just settling for an impotent, gutless gospel. And we need something better than pushy religious moralism, or just giving up and withdrawing from the world altogether. Let's just get into our Christian huddle. We need something better than Christians arguing with each other about who's more right than the other. We need something better than Christianity that buys into the consumerism and individualism that pervade our culture. We need something better than all the defensiveness and pride. We need something better than shallow religious platitudes and sentiment. We need something holy and different, something divine and not of this world that would give us genuine hope and speak to the deepest longings of our souls. Where can we turn for something like that? Whenever the church loses its way, veers off course, we go back to Jesus. We always need to go back to Jesus. See, a trendsetter is someone who leads the way. It's somebody who thinks out of the box and goes against the grain and does things nobody else does. And by that definition, Jesus is the original cosmic trendsetter. He's the ultimate hipster, right? He had the beard and everything. Jesus was an outsider. He was an outsider to the religious establishment of the time. He was considered a heretic and a sinner by all the religious experts. His message was so radical and revolutionary that those in power felt like they had to kill him, that would be the only way to stop him. That didn't work out so well. His life and work were so powerful that it changed the entire course of history and continues to advance today to the ends of the earth. For those of us who have been part of the established church for a while, it's easy to forget that these are our revolutionary roots. It started with a countercultural movement that couldn't be stopped. It started with something that nobody had ever seen before. So, what does it mean to be trendsetters today in our cultural context? How can we set an example of faith and conduct that would point people to Jesus? How can we be different in our world today so we can make a difference? In the passage that was read for us, Jesus gives us these two images to help illustrate who his people are supposed to be in this world. He says, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." And so we want to talk a little bit about what he means by these two statements. First, Jesus says, "You're the salt of the earth." But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, this requires a little bit of cultural unpacking here. You might be wondering, how can salt lose its saltiness, right? Well, salt in ancient times was not like the nearly pure sodium chloride that we use today. Salt in ancient times was full of impurities and dirt and sand and other minerals caked together, so that if you left a pile of salt out in the rain, all of the actual salt could leach out, leaving only the impurities behind. It would still look like salt, but it wouldn't be salty anymore. It wouldn't be useful. Another way that salt was very different in ancient times is that today salt is very cheap and readily available. In ancient times, salt was valued nearly as much as gold because it was essential to life. It had several important uses as a preservative, as a medicinal and cleansing agent, and of course, seasoning. When you add salt to food, it penetrates. It changes the very nature of the food. Meat that was once tough and bland becomes tender and full of flavor. And so when Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth," he's saying you are precious. You are valuable. You are useful. You are essential to life. You will change the world, but only if you're actually salty. If you're different, if you are distinct from the world. And the question is how? How are we supposed to be different? Because being different in and of itself doesn't mean anything, right? What does it mean that Jesus calls us to be different? And here's the rub, okay? Usually, when Christians talk about being holy and set apart and being different, here is what our natural tendency is. Our natural tendency is to assume that it means being better than others. We assume it means being morally superior. Let me tell you, that is not what Jesus means at all. There is nothing holy about that. In fact, that's just the way of the world. Everyone thinks they're more righteous than everyone else. It's not just Christians. It's just worse when people do it in the name of God. And that is what the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the religious establishment, were all about. And they're the only group of people Jesus had no patience for. Because Jesus came to show us something different from the world. He came to show us a whole new way of relating to God and relating to one another. A way that is otherworldly, a way that is divine and supernatural, that is not of this world. Let me explain, okay? In Jesus' way, he turns everything upside down. In Jesus' way, the poor, the weak, the marginalized are the ones he calls blessed. In Jesus' way, the ones who feel farthest from God are actually the ones who are nearest to him. And the ones who think they're closest to God are the ones who are actually farthest from him. Jesus' way is about a righteousness that surpasses the religious elite and teachers of the law, because it's an ethic based on humility and love rather than rules and being right. That's the way we think. But Jesus came to give us something different. Jesus' way isn't about combativeness and competition. His way is about compassion and kindness. It's different. Jesus lays out what this new way looks like in much more detail in his famous Sermon on the Mount, which is where this passage that we're looking at sits right in the beginning of. And we're going to actually dive deeper into that in a few weeks. We're going to come back to the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to talk about that. But for today, I want us to think about how we need to be different. Not in the way that the world thinks. Different not meaning better, but different meaning like Jesus. How is God calling us to be different like Jesus? How can we become more salty? I know today salty means angry and bitter, but salty like in the way Jesus means it. If, speaking of trend setting, right? If we just wear what everyone else wears, that might make us trendy, but it wouldn't necessarily make us a trendsetter. Likewise, if we're just doing what everyone else is doing, that makes us followers, not people who lead the way, not people who are called to be a holy people. For many of us, okay, fine, for all of us, our challenge is to stand apart from a culture that is constantly luring us into complacency at every turn. I think that is probably our greatest challenge today as Christians. We get sucked into the culture around us, and we follow the cultural narrative that says life is all about me. Our culture tells us to live for ourselves, to do what feels good in the moment, to do what everyone else is doing. But Jesus invites us into a life that flows out of something much deeper. He invites us to live for something bigger than ourselves. He invites us to discover life that comes from service and self-sacrifice. He invites us to stand apart, to be different, so that we can make a difference. So for some of us, maybe that means making and keeping commitments, even when it's costly or inconvenient, letting our yes be yes and our no be no. Maybe it means making different choices with our time and with our money for the sake of others rather than just self-indulgence. Maybe it means doing things that are uncomfortable for the sake of others and for the sake of love rather than just staying in our comfort zones. Maybe it means acting with honesty and integrity, even if it means risking advancement in your career or at school. Maybe it means prioritizing your spiritual health, or making investments in the spiritual health of others, or your friends and family. Friends, if somebody looked at your life, what would clue them into the fact that you are a follower of Jesus? What practices and rhythms might you need to instill into your life to make sure that Christ is at the center? How might God be inviting you to be more distinct, more salty as a follower of Jesus? The second image that Jesus provides to guide how we're supposed to be in the world is that of a lamp and a town, a city built on a hill. He says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. See, Jesus' point is that not only do Christians need to be distinct, they also need to be distinguishable. You need to be distinguishable from others. You need to be visible. We're not meant to be hidden. We're supposed to shine, right? What good is being salty and distinct from others if you just stay hidden all the time? Here's what could be a hard word for some of you. Being distinguishable means that we need to be willing to out ourselves as Christians, even if it means being subject to some discomfort, possibly even some persecution. I want to note that just before talking about salt and light, Jesus says, "Blessed are the persecuted." So are you blessed? It's a good question. Are we willing to come out of hiding and let others know who we are and whose we are? Do your neighbors know that you follow Jesus? Do your roommates know you follow Jesus? Do your coworkers know you follow Jesus? Do your children know you follow Jesus? Making ourselves visible as Christians not only has the potential to change others, it most certainly will change us. It'll challenge us to be more mindful of our conduct. I had a friend in seminary who refused to put one of those little Jesus fishes on his car, specifically because he didn't want his aggressive driving to be a bad witness to people. And while I admire his self-awareness, maybe it would have been better to put the fish on the inside of the car as well as on the outside of the car, as a reminder to himself that even the way he drives is setting an example for good or bad. Right out of college, I worked part-time as a youth director at a church for several years. But during the week, I also had a full-time job as a peon medical clerk at a hospital. And as I'm working and getting to know my coworkers, certain topics become inevitable. Oh, you just graduated college. Where'd you graduate from? Gordon College. What's that? Well, it's a Christian liberal arts school, in Massachusetts. Oh, what did you study? What did you major? Biblical studies. Oh, you're going to be a priest. Well, no, not really, but so on and so forth. Eventually, everyone knew that I had a weekend gig as a youth director at a church. Everyone knew I was a Christian, and I realized that whether I liked it or not, I was setting an example. I was conscious of the fact that what I said and what I did mattered. I had the opportunity to show what my faith was about through my conduct. And so what I do, I worked my butt off. I regularly went above and beyond what I was asked to do. When people got stressed, I remained calm and non-anxious. When people gossiped or complained, I maintained my integrity and I listened with compassion. I never judged. I never preached at people. I just tried to be respectful, kind, and generous, and not ashamed of who I was. Over time, I earned trust. I had the opportunity to, answer questions about my faith to the best of my ability. I think I was distinct and I was distinguishable. I was different from everyone else, and everybody knew why. How about you? Are you distinct? Are you distinguishable? Now, I didn't lead any coworkers to Christ, nor did I do anything particularly spectacular. I was just serving Jesus through my work. I was just being a witness. But I didn't let anyone look down on me because I was young. Instead, I tried to set an example in my faith and conduct. And I hope people who knew me saw me as an example of a Christian who is trying to live what he believed. Maybe I made being a Christian, a little less weird and strange or mysterious for someone. Maybe I even made being a Christian a little bit more attractive. What would it mean for you to come out of hiding in your workplace or your school or with your neighbors? I'm not suggesting you hang posters of Jesus all over your cubicle or try to sneak Christ into every conversation. We're not trying to be manipulative or cheesy. It's just about being open and natural about this essential part of who you are if you are a follower of Jesus. Like my friend Delia, is there something about you that sets you apart and lets it be known that you are not like everyone else? Today she listens to all kinds of music, no big deal. But she's devoted her life to empowering youth and raising them up to be the next generation of community organizers. She is still, to this day, a trendsetter. When someone asks you, what are your plans for the weekend? Tell them you're going to church. Don't be vague. When you eat lunch at your school cafeteria, dun, 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 bow your head. Give thanks for God's provision. Not to make a show for others, but to not be afraid. To not be afraid to let who you are on the inside show on the outside. And I'm not here to tell you what you have to do. The point isn't to be legalistic or to be motivated by shame. The point is for us to be intentional, to respond to God's call to be salt and light, to be distinct and distinguishable, to be bold in our faith, whatever that might mean for you. Because when we bring Jesus with us into the places he called us, we will inevitably be more aware of his presence, and we will inevitably be more aware of the example that we are setting in our faith and conduct. Maybe some of you are afraid to do that right now. Maybe you're afraid your conduct doesn't match your faith very well. And the reality is, for many of us, what we believe isn't always consistent with how we behave. Our faith is sometimes divorced from our actions or conduct. We believe in the love and power of God, but have a hard time translating that into lives that truly demonstrate that love and power to others. And I want to remind you of Pastor Dave's sermon last week. We are not called to be examples of moral perfection or examples of how great we are. We are called to be examples of God's grace and power. We are called to let others see our progress, to let our light shine before others, which means being humble and authentic, owning our mistakes and our shortcomings, letting others see your brokenness so that they might be able to see God through the cracks. Jesus calls us to be salt and light, to be distinct and to be distinguishable. He calls us to be trendsetters, to set an example for others in faith and conduct. As we said last week, one way we're doing this together as a church is to choose 3 people that we would like to invest in and bless for the sake of Jesus. Some of us, you just need something concrete, right? Something structured. And this is it. We're encouraging us all to choose 3 people, preferably one person who is a Christian, who is already a follower of Jesus that you can encourage, and hopefully at least one person who isn't. Maybe somebody who has some questions, somebody who's seeking. How can you be a blessing to that person? Our goal is to be intentional about allowing God to use us in the life of another person, and following these steps up here is just a simple way to do that. Perhaps this can be a practice that you commit yourself to. Maybe this is something that you wouldn't normally do. That is the point. To do something different. So you can be different. so you can make a difference. I know that already there are so many of you who give sacrificially, who serve selflessly, and you walk in obedience to God in radical ways. You are already setting an example of faith and conduct that points people to God. Let your light shine. Get out there. My hope is that we would continue being a church that's like this city on a hill, because the world needs to see something different. When people come here, I hope they find something different instead of the same old, same. May we be a spiritual community, not just a natural one. I have seen too many churches that simply become social clubs, that become just cliques. That's natural. Everybody likes to hang out with people they like. Okay, there's nothing divine about that. Let's be supernatural. Let's be a community that loves when it's uncomfortable, that loves people who are different from us. May we be a people of generous hospitality, welcome, and sacrificial service. May we be a place where we confront sin with radical love. May we be a place of safety and grace. May we be a place of holy passion, where we seek the heart and will of God together. May we be this countercultural community, a movement that would change lives and change our city. Whether you're a high school student or a college student or a stay-at-home parent or somebody who's worked for your years at some company, you can make a difference wherever God has placed you. But only if you are different, only if you are distinguishable, only if you're different from the combative or complacent Christians people are so used to. More immediately, we can all take one small step today. One way we can be salt and light is right after this service ends. Instead of leaving right away or going straight to a friend or someone who's just like you, do something different. Welcome a stranger. Meet someone new and learn something about them. Let them feel welcomed and valued. If you're shy or an introvert like myself, I get it. That sounds pretty awful. Here's my pro tip. Just look for someone who also doesn't look like they want to talk to anyone. Your conversation will be quick. What can you do differently this week to be a little saltier and a little shinier? Would you invite the Holy Spirit to speak to you now and bring to mind some of the situations and people in your life? Maybe you've been distinct, really different, but not distinguishable. You've kept your faith hidden. How can you let your light shine before others? Or maybe you're very distinguishable. Maybe everyone knows you're a Christian, but you haven't been distinct in any meaningful way. Or maybe you've been distinct in ways that haven't always pointed to the grace and compassion of Jesus. Ask God, how is God calling you to be salt and light? Would you respond to him by saying, "Here am I, Lord, send me"? Let's bow our heads together. I want to invite you to take some time just to pray in silence and to just bring all of these thoughts before God. Ask him to speak. Open your ears to listen. And respond to him. Offer yourself to him in service and in obedience. In a few moments, we're going to continue our worship with confession and communion. Let's just take a few moments now to pray.